My name is Jason Alari, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Historical Society of Carroll County. And we're going to say thank you to the amazing staff here at Grace. And Pastor Matt, can you come up and say hello to the crowd for just a second?
Sorry,
here. It's okay.
I'm here. Hello.
Hey, Pastor Matt.
Hey, how are you, Jason?
Hey.
Hello, welcome. Thank you so much. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty, but we got it sorted. Thank you so much for being here at Grace Lutheran Church. Attend to my hat, which says, if you can't read it, pastor warning, anything you say or do may be used in a sermon. And that is, a friend of mine found out that this week when we were having a text conversation, and I told him, you've just inspired me. Yeah, be careful. Thank you so much for being here. We're always glad to welcome the Carroll County Historical Society. I hope that you enjoy your lunch. I hope that you enjoy the speaker. And if we can do anything for you, please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you very much.
Thanks. So Laura Bankert, our Outreach and Events Director, will scold me if I don't cover some of the amazing upcoming events and programs that are in store at the Historical Society, so just bear with me for a moment. Just a quick note, April 21st, I am persuaded they will do great execution. Will be a Carroll 250 talk, part of our Carroll 250 speaker series. It's at Mount Airy Branch Library at 6:30. The presenter is Travis Shaw. He's an amazing historian and speaker out of Virginia. We also want to announce May 10th, this society will be at the Flower and Jazz Festival, so come see us there at our booth. May 10th, another Carroll 250 speaker series. This will be a talk about Ellsworth Cemetery, and there is a tour included with that. Also, May 20th, our next BLT, the Snowdens, the Shellmans, and St. John Catholic Church, presented by Dr. Melanie Nielsen. It'll be right here, same time, 12 o'clock next month, our next BLT. And then finally, May 24th, an afternoon with Mary Shellman. You've probably seen the postcards that are lying around there. I think there were some in the lobby. An afternoon with Mary Shellman. It's going to be a terrific event. We have a reenactor playing Mary Shellman from Colonial Williamsburg. Mary Shellman's original poetry will be recited. Music that she wrote for the suffragist movement will be on display. We're going to have a band that is going to play her music, and you'll be able to hear that probably for the first time in a long time. So that is May 24th at the Carroll County Arts Council, 2 to 4. Please mark your calendars for that event. And of course, we have the Mary Shellman Civil War to Suffrage exhibit opening up at the Historical Society in the Shellman House in May. So thank you for letting me share all those amazing events that the Historical Society is putting on. Can we have a very big, warm round of applause for our two sponsors for today's talk? We have an anonymous sponsor, and we also have Sherry Regal is sponsoring today's talk. Can we have a round of applause for those folks? If you're interested, you see an upcoming BLT and you think, you know, I want to support that person, or I love that subject matter, you can go to the Society's website. The sponsorships are $75. They help offset the cost of rental of Grace, and they offset some of the expenses related to refreshments. So please keep that in mind. If you want to be anonymous, we can do that, but we can say your name and you can be acknowledged for supporting our terrific BLTs. Another announcement to make. Cindy is going to be talking about some of the samplers that she brought today, but the Historical Society brought 8 samplers from our collection for you to see, and they are truly magnificent. Sage and Aiden are back there kind of manning the table, and the only thing that we'll ask is that because our samplers were pulled right from the collection, they're not in a case and they have no glass over top. So if you have coffee or cake or something, maybe just leave it at your table, and we wouldn't want a piece of that amazing cake to drop on one of them. So just keep that in mind. But you can see those after the presentation. And Cindy, I believe you're going to have someone actually holding up the samplers for you during your talk. So you'll be able to see the samplers that Cindy brought with her today. And with that, I think I got it all right, Laura? Okay. I'm going to introduce Cindy. Cynthia Steinhoff is the Vice President and Program Chair for the Anne Arundel Genealogical Society and a member of the faculty of Anne Arundel Community College, where she serves as Director of the Library. She holds a Bachelor's of Education. Yes, Lynn. Thank you for finding her, Lynn.
We found each other a long time.
That's right. She holds a Bachelor of Education degree from Edinburgh State College, Master's of Science from Clarion State College, and a Master of Business Administration from the University of Baltimore. Her interest in genealogy stems from hearing stories as a child about her maternal grandmother's family who came from Scotland. She enjoys improving her research skills by attending courses offered by the Genealogical Research Institute of Pittsburgh and the Salt Lake Institute of Genealogy. Cindy is also an accomplished needle crafter, a member of the Annapolis Historic Sampler Guild and Loudoun Sampler Guild. She often speaks to genealogy groups. One of her presentations addresses how family names and dates stitched on a young girl's sampler make it a source of genealogical information. The sampler was a rite of passage for young girls to establish a skill and find their place in society. Her work in this area is included in a book that she co-authored, Delaware Discoveries, Girlhood Embroidery, 1750 to 1980, published by the Biggs Museum of American Art in 2019. So Cindy, please come up and share with us your wealth of information. Thank you.
I'm really happy to be here today. Lynn and I have been pals for a long, long time. We are both librarians. We were both very active in the Maryland Library Association, and I think frequently we sat across a table at a board meeting of the Maryland Library Association. I spent many years on that board that I can't even count how many years, and I know Lynn was there for a lot of them. So I'm glad that she belongs to this group and that she asked me to come and talk to you. Samplers are really my passion. I love learning about them. I love digging around in research to find out more about the girls and their families. The book that was mentioned about Delaware Discoveries, that was a wonderful experience. We were working on a grant-funded project to find and identify samplers that were made in Delaware. And I can't tell you how many times we would go to a viewing day where people would be invited to bring their samplers in for us to look at. Can't even tell you how many times we would go there and somebody would say, well, you know, the girls in Delaware didn't make samplers. They just didn't do that here. They did that in Pennsylvania. They didn't do it in Delaware. Well, we were aware when we started the project, we were knowledgeable about probably 75 to 100 samplers that had been made in Delaware. And we knew they had been made in Delaware because the girls often would put their location. So they would put the name of their town, the name of their county, even the name of their state. And there were a lot of them that were Delaware samplers. So between 75 and 100. By the time the book was published, we had 400 Delaware samplers. So there are more coming. I still hear from people who have a Delaware sampler that is not in the book. So there are many more of them still showing up. So most of the 13 original colonies have samplers from girls who made them either at school or at home. So don't let anybody convince you otherwise. Okay, so what we're going to do today, you can see the agenda behind me, I think. Next slide. Okay, so the agenda for today, we're going to do a general overview of samplers. Then we're going to talk about some Maryland girls who made samplers, and you'll see their names up there, and you'll see their samplers when we have a chance to show the samplers around to the group, or go back and look at them on the tables over here. And then I have I have two different Delaware pieces. One is a sampler that is one sampler made by a girl in Sussex County, Delaware. That was another thing we heard, that Sussex is the most southernmost county in Delaware and also the most rural one. And we also heard that nobody in Sussex County made samplers. They did, yeah. And then I have, and I don't know, on the table over here, and I'll talk about this at the very end. This is a group of 4 samplers made by sisters in a Delaware family, and we'll take a look at that towards the end. Okay, overview of samplers. As I noted earlier, the earliest known samplers made in America date back to the mid-1700s. There could have been samplers made earlier, and they were either just got worn out or were destroyed in some way, or we've just never found them. So there could be some that were earlier than that. Girls typically learned how to make samplers from teachers who taught in school. A few would learn from their mother, but remember, back in the 17 and 1800s, these families were large. It was not unusual for a family to have 10 or 12 or even 15 children. And so the mothers did not have a whole lot of time to teach the daughters how to do needlework. Hence the schools picking up and teaching the girls how to do samplers. And often you find a sampler where the girl stitches her name and then she stitches the name of the school she attended. One of the schools in Delaware that produced a lot of samplers was called Southern Boarding School. It's located in the northern part of, it was actually more in the northern part of Delaware. And that school, excuse me, that school produced a number of samplers over the years. And of course, as I noted earlier, some girls made samplers at home from their mother or grandmother or another relative. And a lot of families truly did believe the work of their daughters to be works of art, and they displayed them in their home, and they were proud to do that. Next slide. Okay, what makes a sampler? Well, early samplers were stitched mostly on linen fabric and with silk threads, because those were the kinds of materials that they had available. Depending on the area where they lived, linen may have been a cloth that was woven in that area and was easy to obtain. And then they would use silk threads, because that's what most threads were made from back in the early days of sampler making. Cotton threads came into use in the late 1800s, so you started seeing some samplers being made with cotton threads, but they still used linen as the fabric base for the sampler. Some families mounted and framed their daughters' samplers and hung them in the house to be decorative, and they also did it because they were proud of their daughter's skill with the needle. And so they wanted to make sure that their friends had an opportunity to observe their daughter's work. And another myth I have to dispel: not every single sampler has an alphabet on it. That's another one of those myths out there, that it has to be ABC 1, 2, 3 in a lot of places for it to actually be a sampler, but it doesn't. You'll see over there, most of mine are a mix of some numbers and some quotes from various places, images, that sort of thing. But they don't always have to have an alphabet in order to be called a sampler. Okay, next slide. So how did I get involved with all of this? Well, my mother and my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, both did needlework. And they taught me how to stitch. It was mostly my grandmother who did that. I'm a lefty. Instructions for doing needlework are, then at least, I'm not sure about now, but then, of course, were written for somebody who stitched with their right hand, and believe me, there's a difference. So my grandmother was very patient, and she finally did get me to learn how to stitch using my left hand. And my stitching looks just fine. Even my mother thought that. I started doing this when I was, oh gosh, probably in my middle teens. I remember I was staying with my grandmother for a few days, and she decided I was bored. And so she handed me some money, and she said, go down to G.C. Murphy. They carry embroidery stuff. Buy it and come back and we'll do embroidery. And that's really what got me started, was my grandmother showing me how to do this. So I actually started looking at samplers when I was in high school or maybe my first year of college. And I would read books about them and just became interested in them. At that point, I never thought that I would be buying at auctions or in other venues, buying old samplers, antique samplers, and maintaining a collection of them. After I finished college, I had time to go back to actually stitching again, and I started back to stitching samplers, of course, and I just kept delving deeper and deeper into the history of samplers. Collecting samplers started probably about 15 or 18 years after I graduated from college, and I've been collecting samplers ever since, and have a pretty nice collection of them at home. I belong to a number of needlework groups too. I belong to, I think it was in the introduction, I belong to the Loudoun Sampler Guild, which is located was based in Virginia, but they do a lot of things now via Zoom, so they have members. In fact, they had a speaker from Canada, so I guess I can say that they have an international membership and a group of people who are interested in samplers from lots of places that take part in their group's activities. And I belong to a couple of other sampler guilds that aren't really local, but I like to keep up with what they're doing and understand what it is they're doing, and see if there's anything new out there that they're looking at. So that's pretty much what I do with associations. The introduction mentioned that I was the vice president of the Anne Arundel Genealogical Society and serve as program chair, and that's something I've been doing now for about, I think about 6 years. And I've had a couple of presentations that involved samplers as a tool for genealogical research. Because again, since so many of the stitchers would put names and birth dates of their family members on the sampler, that could be the only way you found out how old Uncle Charlie was seeing his name on a sampler that Uncle Charlie's mother had made. Okay, next slide. Okay, now we're going to start talking about the samplers that I brought with me today. Are we doing a walk around with them? Okay. Okay, the first two that we're going to talk about are from the same family. One of them is Rachel Linthicum, and the other is her sister Elizabeth Linthicum. And those are I think the first two on the left of that, of the rectangular table there. The Linthicum family, as you can imagine, has some roots in Anne Arundel County, the town of Linthicum in the northern part of Anne Arundel County. Although there are plenty of Linthicums in other parts of the Baltimore area, these two girls were from the Anne Arundel County line of the family. So that's where I live now, is Anne Arundel County. We've lived there for, oh my gosh, 40-some years now. So Rachel actually made two samplers. The first one that she made was not quite as ornate, not quite as colorful, not quite as well laid out as her second sampler, which is the one that's making the rounds here. These two, they're very similar. They're not exact, but they are very similar. So most likely the two girls had the same teacher. And the teacher probably gave them some latitude in how they wanted their sampler to look. And these two are very similar to one another, but there still are some differences. Okay, what can I tell you about Rachel? Rachel was born in 1816, and she died in 1892. She married a gentleman by the name of William Corcoran, and they had 3 sons and 4 daughters, so seven children in total. One of their daughters had what I would consider to be a very unusual first name for that time period in America. Now, this was in the early 1800s. one of their daughters was named Louisiana Virginia Corcoran. So was she nicknamed Louise, perhaps, or did they really call her Louisiana? I just find that to be a very interesting name. Elizabeth's full name, she has two middle names. Okay, Elizabeth Linthicum's full name is Elizabeth Anne Bell Linthicum. She completed her sampler in 1893, and her family, her father, has a, I guess I would call it an honorary sign hanging in the town of Linthicum that gives his name and I think his birth dates, and then just says that he was one of the first Linthicum family members to settle in that area, and was part of the reason why the town ended up being called Linthicum. So in addition to the samplers, the Linthicum samplers by Elizabeth and Rachel, one other sister and a cousin also made samplers, and those are the other two that are part of my collection. But these are probably the prettiest, the most well done in terms of the samplers from that family. Okay, so we'll leave the Linthicum family, and we're going to go to another sampler, Henrietta Maria Hall, and she's over here someplace on the table. She is from Annapolis, and she stitched her name near the bottom of the sampler, and then she stitched the name of her town, Annapolis. And the name of the town is a little bit larger than her own name. So she must have been very proud to be able to say that she lived in Annapolis and made the sampler there. The other thing that she did that I find kind of interesting is that when she stitched the word Annapolis, she used an uppercase A, and then lowercase NNA, and then an uppercase P, and then lowercase OLIS. So the uppercase A we can understand because that's typically how a town is named. There's a capital letter for the first name of the town. But the P in the middle is kind of, wonder why she did that. And I don't have any, I can't speculate, I don't have any idea why she did it. But it's just interesting that it's clearly an uppercase P. She finished her sampler, and she included a date. She finished her sampler on December 1st, 1827, and that's added to the bottom of the sampler. And of course, she also, as I said, noted her hometown. She was a tough one to research, and I don't really have enough information that makes me feel confident that I'm reporting on the correct Henrietta Maria Hall, because there were several of them that could have been in the age range of making a sampler in 1827, I just couldn't find enough information that could lead me to which Henrietta Maria Hall, who lived in Annapolis and was of the age to have made a sampler, would this be. So the best I can say is she's an Annapolis girl, and her name's Henrietta Maria Hall, and she was born in 1827. And maybe someday we'll figure this out, because that happens sometimes. Serendipity sometimes strikes. Okay. So we'll move on now to the one sampler that I brought that is not in a frame. And the reason it's not in a frame is that after I bought it at an auction and the sampler was shipped to me, I opened up the box and the frame was falling apart. Whether it was like that before I acquired it, because my recollection is that I just saw what was an image of the sampler, not necessarily the frame. But the sampler is doing quite well over here on the table without a frame, and does quite well in my house without a frame, so I haven't been too eager to take it off to the framers. So again, this is another Anne Arundel County girl, Rachel Sophia Waters. She was born in 1806. She died in 1877 in Anne Arundel County. She included rows of alphabets and some other text on her sampler. And she made another sampler in 1819 when she would have been about 13 years old. but I've not seen that. I've just seen references to her having made another sampler. Of course I don't own it. So, her parents were named Jacob Franklin Waters, and her mother was Martha Hall Mulliken. There's that Hall name used again as a middle name. Lots of Halls in Anne Arundel County. And that middle name does frequently show up for both men and women as a middle name if their surname is not Hall. The Waters family attended St. James Parish, which is in the southern part of Anne Arundel County. It's one of the oldest parish churches in the county, maybe is even the oldest one. And she is buried there at St. James Episcopal Church in southern Anne Arundel County. I think it's 3 sampler girls who are buried in that cemetery. So it leads me to believe that with that many girls making samplers and who were also affiliated with that church, that perhaps there was a teacher in that area, perhaps even someone affiliated with the church who was teaching girls how to do needlework at that time. That's often how it just sort of springs up, and you find girls making samplers. And I think she's buried at St. James in southern Anne Arundel County. Did I mention that she and her husband had 10 children? She had plenty of little ones. This is another one of my favorite samplers, Mary Edge Webb. Edge is her middle name. It's a family surname that her parents decided to use as her middle name. This family was from Anne Arundel County, and they lived, and some of them actually still do live, in the area they live near the Severn River in Anne Arundel County, and they're generally in the Millersville and Crownsville area of Anne Arundel County. If that gives you, if you're familiar with Anne Arundel County and those communities, then you'll have a pretty good sense of where they were from. But it's basically central Anne Arundel County, and this is going to be inland from the Chesapeake Bay by a few miles, although of course the Severn River flows into the Chesapeake Bay. Mary Edge Webb was born May 3rd, 1810, in Anne Arundel County. Her father's name was James Webb, and her mother's maiden name was Clarissa Harvey Magruder. Not really had much luck in finding her to see what her background is, but I will persevere and perhaps find that someday. Mary Edge Webb married a gentleman by the name of Henry Williams Woodward. Again, that Woodward family was another family that was very prominent in Anne Arundel County back in these times and lived in that same general area of what today is now Crownsville, Millersville area. Lots and lots of Woodwards. I have either 2 or 3 samplers where the girl's surname is Woodward. So she married Henry Williams Woodward. He was born in 1803, and they married on February 24th, 1835. Mary Edge Webb was about 26 years old when she married. She died on March the 12th, 1894, at the age of 83. Quite an age for someone in that time frame. And unfortunately, her husband died quite a bit younger than she did. I think they were married about 6 years when he passed away. And if any of you are familiar enough with the general Annapolis area, the Crownsville area, Baldwin United Methodist Church is one of the oldest, probably the oldest church in that particular area. It's not that far from Crownsville or Millersville. It's sort of would have been out in the country before they started building housing developments in that area. But this Mary Edge Webb and many of the Woodwards attended Baldwin United Methodist Church, which was there, but probably in a different building than what it has now. The current building was built I think it was in the early 1900s. So that's Mary Edge Webb. Very probably she probably grew up within about 6 miles of where I live. Now I have the 2, or the 6, I guess the 5 samplers from Delaware to talk about. And again, I just want to make sure that we know that Delaware did produce samplers. Delaware girls did make samplers. We spent about, we meaning others who were collaborating on the book that was eventually published about Delaware samplers. We worked for a good 10 to 12 years on finding samplers, holding documentation days, doing research, working with a publisher to get the book to be laid out and to meet my co-authors' very, very, very demanding color use in the books. She wanted the colors to be exact, and that can take a little bit of work to do that when you're doing a book. The goal for that was, of course, to prove that Delaware girls did make samplers, and as I said earlier, we had 400 by the time we were done, after having known about perhaps 75 to 100 when we started that project. Dr. Allen was the lead in this adventure. She had spent most of her working career at the DAR Museum and Library in Washington, D.C., and at the point that I first met her, which was well before we started working on this book, she was still working there, and she was the director of that museum and library. And then she decided she wanted to retire and she wanted to write. And that's how the Delaware book got started. We often, both of us, Gloria and myself and others who worked with him, were often heard to say that we estimated that the project discovered at least 200 formerly hidden samplers. And that was absolutely true. So Lydia Wharton is the next one here from Delaware. And she has what is truly a marking sampler being a sampler that has mostly alphabets and numerals on it. And you can see that in her case, she also added a lot of family initials down near the bottom of the lettering in her name. She made her sampler in 1821, and all of those initials at the bottom check out as matching up with family names. There were a couple that don't appear, and they were likely children who were born after she made this sampler. What's interesting to me about this particular sampler is where Lydia lived at the time she made it. She lived in Sussex County, Delaware, which is the southernmost of the 3 counties in Delaware. It's also the most rural even today. And back in 1821, when she was making this sampler, it would have been even more rural, less settlement than other parts, say northern Delaware, where you had a city like Wilmington that was very much involved in trade, and so there was a lot of activity and a lot of people living in some of those larger cities that were to the north. But Sussex County was very, very rural, primarily an agricultural economy, and that was exactly what her father did. Her father owned quite a bit of land, and he farmed. I know the general area where their family home was located, and it still is pretty rural. It's still being used as a farm. I've not been able to determine whether any of the descendants of Lydia or others in the Wharton family are still working the farm, but it is still very much in a rural area of Sussex County, sort of like almost right in the center, really, pretty far inland from the beach resorts. And let's see, what else can I say? I know I've read a lot about the Wharton family. Her parents' names were Isaiah Wharton, and his wife's maiden name was Elizabeth Hetty Brinkle, B-R-I-N-K-L-E. Lydia married a gentleman by the name of Robert B. Houston. Now, if you come from Texas, you pronounce that Houston. But if you come from Delaware, you pronounce that Houston. Houston is Houston in Delaware. And there were many, 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 many Houstons in this particular part of Sussex County. Eventually, she had a granddaughter who got married, and her granddaughter's new surname after she was married became Toadvine. And yes, there was a fairly large family in southern Delaware that had Toadvine as their surname. And I think it's quite a neat name. It's different, it's very interesting. I have no idea what it's derived from. I guess I should do some research on that. But yeah, so Lydia had would have been her granddaughter who eventually became Lydia Toadvine. And a lot of the members of her family, including two of Lydia's brothers, worked at the, and I'll pronounce this in the Delaware way, the Houston White Basket Factory that was located not too far from where their farm was. And two of the brothers, older brothers of Lydia, were really running that company by the time I discovered and was reading about it. They had taken it over, I guess, from their father. And it was one of the biggest manufacturers of woven baskets in that part of Delaware. And woven baskets at that time were used a lot on farms. And Sussex County was an incredibly rural county, and there were lots of farms. So I could see why there would be a need to have a local company making baskets for agricultural purposes. And apparently this was quite a successful firm for that family, and operated for many, many years, even after Lydia's father and her brothers, who ran it for the next generation, even after they passed away, the company was still making baskets. And if you, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Delaware beach resort areas, but if you know where Bethany Beach is located, in southern Delaware, and you just head straight west, eventually you're going to drive through some land that belonged to the Wharton family. That's where their property was located. So that's Lydia Wharton from Sussex County in Delaware. The last one we're going to talk about is a set of 4 samplers that are temporarily, let's call it that, temporarily attached to a piece of mounting board because I have to sort of figure out what I want to do with them. Okay? This group of samplers was made by girls in the Eves family, and it's E-V-E-S. They were from Newcastle County, Delaware, which is the northernmost county from Delaware's 3 counties. They were from Newcastle County, Delaware. The girls' names are Elizabeth, and she's at the top left, and her sampler was made in 1808. Sarah Eves, she also made a sampler in 1808, and her sampler is next to Elizabeth. And their samplers are very similar. The other 2 Eves girls who made samplers are Anna Mary Eves, and she made hers, she's on the bottom left, and she made her sampler in 1817. And then Rebecca Eves, who made a sampler in 1825, and that's at the bottom right. And those 2 are more similar to one another than they are to the 2 at the top by Elizabeth and Sarah. I recently acquired these. I work with a couple of antiques dealers that specialize in samplers, and they know what I like, so they often try to entice me to buy. In this case, it was something that I really wanted. First of all, it was Delaware. And second, just the idea of having 4 samplers coming from the same family and they had descended through the family. The dealer that I purchased them from was, apparently, their family was cleaning out an estate, and when they saw quite a few, when the family saw quite a few samplers still in the house, they called this dealer, and I don't know what other ones she bought, but she did buy these, and then, of course, now they're mine. And I just have to figure out how I want to have them framed. This family, the Eves family, at the point that those first two girls, the girls who made their samplers in 1808, at that point in time, you did not see many people with the Eves surname in Delaware. But as you went through each 10-year census, set of 10-year census records, there were more and more of them. And then they started spreading into southeastern Pennsylvania and up into New Jersey. And they were all connected to that one bunch of Eves family members who lived in Newcastle County and would have been part of the group of people, the group of Eves families, the same area where these girls' parents lived in Newcastle. So this is, I could probably spend the rest of my life researching the Eves family now, given the number of them that I keep finding when I do a little bit of research. So those, and I guess you're getting to see, yeah, you're getting to see the 4 samplers that are done by these girls. I have a surprise for you. Even Lynn doesn't know what this is all about. And I decided to just keep it a secret for everybody today. So I have it up here. In Carroll County, I think more I think it's more the western part of Carroll County, there was a family that came here. It came here from Ireland, and their last name is Birnie, B-I-R-N-I-E. Does that ring a bell with some of you? Okay, I have Hester Birnie. Now, this one was made in, she has listed Belfast, and it was dated May 23rd, 1808. And I will, let's put it on, I'd like you to see this because it is absolutely meticulous. I think first of all, she used a very fine count of linen. And the count of linen is the number of threads per inch of a piece of linen. And the thinner the thread, the more threads you can fit in that inch of linen. And also, the other corollary that goes by that is the thinner the thread, the more difficult it is to work with it. And for a young girl to have made a sampler like that while she was still a young girl, and she was, and I kind of grabbed her at the last minute. I didn't really think about her much until yesterday, and I decided I was going to bring her. And I forgot to grab my packet of Hester Birnie information. So I don't really have her background, other than I did thoroughly research it before I bought the sampler, as I always do. But I thought that given that there was a Birnie connection in Carroll County, that this might be something that would be of interest to some of you. And so please take a good hard look at it if it's something that you're interested in. Okay. I think, do I have time for some questions? Yes. Okay. Who's going to moderate questions? Sure, I can when I get a question. Who's going? Okay.
I have a question about the frames.
There we go.
Thank you.
Okay. Good. Okay.
I had a question about the frames. Now, obviously, we still have frames. Are all members to have? Do you ever get ones that come with their quote-unquote original frames? What's your strategy? Do you go out and try to find historic frames, or?
Well, I don't necessarily look for historic frames. I have one of them today. When it arrived, the frame arrived broken, and I felt like it. In fact, it's the one that's unframed here, wherever she's floating around. Yeah. I was concerned that there would be damage done to the linen from the frame because it was pretty badly cracked. And I chose to leave it unframed for the time being, as a way of protecting it from any further damage, and just pitched that frame that it came in into the trash can. And a lot of old samplers, when you, sorry, okay, I need to move over. Okay, a lot of old samplers, when you buy them, are not framed, because frames, as we know, can break. Perhaps some of the parents couldn't afford to have a sampler framed for a girl. Perhaps they didn't really care that much. I mean, when girls made samplers in school, often it was a school assignment, and it didn't matter whether you liked doing your stitching or not, you still had to do a sampler. And so I'm sure that there are a lot of unfinished samplers stashed away in the back of a drawer in an old house that was built in 1805 or something. You know, I just can imagine that. That also became an issue of preserving them. Would they be able to survive for a couple of hundred years? But a lot of them have. A lot of them, and like I said, a lot of them you see that a lot of them you can buy without a frame on it, especially if it's like a small antiques dealer or an individual selling them and they've just maybe never got around to framing it. If you go to one of the more well-known auction houses that do a lot of artwork, including samplers, they will probably frame them before they put it up for auction, just because they feel like it's a better presentation. So that sometimes happens, is that they get the sampler, they buy the sampler from an estate, or they buy a bunch of them from somebody who collected them or whatever, and then they just do new framing if there's no frame on them at all, or if the original frame wasn't in good shape.
Cindy, I have a question, and then I'll pass the mic over. Roughly around ballpark is fine. When do we kind of start to see them fall out of favor, like pre-Civil War, after the Civil War, and then what are some of the factors where, they just weren't as popular for young people to do?
Okay, so as I noted earlier, you started seeing them in like the 1730s. So think of that as sort of the starting point. But again, not a lot. And it gradually built up. Once girls started going to school, and needlework was often something that was taught in girls' school, in a girl's schooling, not necessarily by her mother, but she would go to a school that taught needlework along with the academics, or there were schools that taught only needlework. They could, go on Saturday mornings to someone's residence, perhaps, who was teaching needlework. So after, the number of samplers produced increased starting sometime after that, say 1730 point, when you started to see a lot of samplers made. And I would say the heyday, when most of the samplers were made, would have been between roughly 1800 and say 1840. And then you start seeing a decline. And by about 1860, 1865, you really don't see all that many samplers being made, not like they had been in the earlier 1800s. So it's that early 1800s period where you see most of them.
Great.
My question, well, first of all, I'll just check that Annapolis, that's polis, is the Greek word for city. So
Anna's city?
Yes,
Yeah.
so, think of that.
That could be, yeah.
But my question is, have you ever found the materials, like where those needles come from to do that fine work, and the cloth, the silk? Has that had to be difficult?
Yeah, they found it somewhere. There must have been, I don't know much about the manufacture of needles, and I really don't know a whole lot about the manufacturing of threads, other than there was a significant industry in making threads, because people sewed, women sewed, they made clothing for their children, so they needed thread for that. And then you have the fancier threads, the silk threads that were used for embroidery. So at some point, somebody figured out how to make those kinds of threads and sell them. I don't really know much about how that all came about. And most likely if you were buying pieces of linen, you could probably, once threads became really available, then you could buy your threads and your linen at the same time, and probably a needle, or needles, plural, as well.
Cindy, you said the samplers died out, but what replaced them? Because at one point you said that the needlecraft, if you will, was sort of a way up the ladder. Mm-hmm. And so did needlecrafting die out, or did something else replace it? They
probably still did a little bit of needlework, but there was more going on for them. I mean, by the 1860s or so, more girls were going to school. They might have been involved in other kinds of activities. They might have preferred reading over to doing needlework. They at some point they got married, and often they were still getting married when they were 18 or so. So sometimes the girls got married and very quickly had their own families, so really didn't have a lot of time to continue doing needlework, or maybe never got interested in it. There was, I would think there would be more things of interest for them to do, to choose from. Because as society developed and as more things were happening in the United States, I would think there would be other activities they might want to take part in, especially if they were going to school. And more than would be going to school later in the 1800s than earlier on.
Cindy, I have a question and a comment too about, I think there's a book that I read about the Civil War where women took apart garments and used the silk thread to do embroidery and other work like that. My other question is, I was told once that in dating samplers, the alphabet, and particularly some of the letters like the J and S are different or missing. Can you address the alphabets?
Yeah, well, there are different styles of alphabets. There are whole books, as a matter of fact, published on different styles of alphabets. And so they did have some choices about using alphabets. There also were some letters that they sometimes dropped and didn't include. I think J was one that was often left out of an alphabet. There might have been one other one. I can't remember what the other one might have been. But and again, whether that was teacher dependent, that the teacher learned how to make her samplers and she never put a J in them, so the teacher's designs that she used with her students would have been probably without a J as well. I've not really read much about that. Just that that there is a wide variety of alphabets, and actually J is a letter that can sometimes look like an I when it's stitched on a sampler. That's one where you sometimes really have to look carefully. An uppercase I.
I have a question.
Sure.
When young girls were taught this in school by a teacher, was there a pattern book that they could choose certain elements of their sampler so that they weren't all the way?
I'm going to go over here and sit down. I'm getting a little tired.
Okay.
You won't be able to hear me. Never mind. I'll stay here. Okay. Thank you.
Just take that.
Okay, pattern books. Most teachers had them. They may have designed them themselves. They may have gotten them from friends or family members who also did needlework. But they did have some patterns that they could use. I don't know that right off the bat when they started teaching needlework that they had them. But they did eventually have patterns that were generally provided by their teacher.
Did they draw the pattern on the fabric first, or they just counted it?
I don't know. I have seen some old samplers where you see what looks to be like some kind of a marking. But whether they were putting it on there to sort of keep their stitching straight or what, I'm not sure why, but I haven't seen much of it, and I have not read anything about it, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did, you know, use some markings or even just draw a straight line to make sure that their stitches were even.
Can you talk a little bit about the colors? I'm assuming that the stitching thread has faded, but do you think the linen has darkened as well?
The linen can darken or fade or stay the same, depending on what happens with the sampler. If you have a sampler and you keep it, and you don't hang it on the wall in your living room, you put it instead, say, in a drawer in your bedroom or in the closet underneath the stack of sheets or something like that. The color of the fabric and probably the thread as well is not going to change all that much. You know, it's light and exposure to sunlight. If it's in an area where it gets sun, it would make the more drastic changes to color. Threads, I think, were a little more unstable in terms of the dyeing. They just didn't have the kinds of things that we have today that can sort of fix the color to keep it from running or from changing color. But again, they still can fade. If they're hanging on the wall in your living room and they get a lot of sunlight through the window, you're probably going to see some fading from your sampler, even if it's made with threads that were made today. We've got two people up here.
Just wondering how you did it. Do you hang on the walls or do you keep them in the drawers?
I have a lot of them hanging on the walls if they're framed. And I try to make sure that if I'm putting an old sampler up there, that the frame is stable. And I'm not going to have it hanging on the wall and then 6 months later all of a sudden crash, boom, it falls down. But I don't have space in my house to really hang all of my samplers on the walls. And of course, some of the samplers that I have bought over the years have been unframed because that's how they were being sold. If they had a frame ever in the past, that frame had long disappeared. Or I bought the sampler and the frame's in bad shape, and I felt I could do more damage to the sampler by leaving it in the frame than I would by just taking it out and leaving it flat. And my samplers that are not framed, by the way, are in archival boxes, so they're acid-free material. They're good sized boxes. I think most of them are about 3 feet square, and they just lay there flat with a piece of linen tissue, a piece of tissue paper between each sampler and the box.
I don't need it. I presume you don't wash them or clean them.
No, that's not a good idea. I might be picking linen threads out of the washing machine.
Oh, well.
That kind of an adventure. I have a friend who, and I can't tell you what product she uses, although she probably has told me, but I have a friend who will sometimes do some spot cleaning. You know, if there's a little dark spot someplace on the linen, on the light-colored linen portion of her sampler, she'll try to clean it off, and she's pretty careful with it. I've never noticed anything that looked like she had dropped Clorox on it or anything, but she has done some cleaning herself. I'm not sure I'm brave enough to do that.
Just to add on to earlier, when we were talking about whether or not they gave up on it or if anything replaced any of the stitching, by any chance, did any of these women pass it on to their daughters? Or was
Often if a mother had done stitching as a child, she might teach the child herself, but she was more likely to send her to a school that offered needlework. And lots of schools for girls, or schools that were co-ed and had separate classes for girls and boys, lots of schools offered needlework to at least get the girls started, because that was something that a lot of parents expected. They expected their daughter to be able to do nice needlework. If for nothing else other than to put the initials of the family on the cloth napkins that they would use at dinner or whatever. Yeah.
We, on this side?
I'm just wondering, how far west do the samplers go? Do you see a sampler?
I would say, I think I can say this pretty safely, that they were much more common along the East Coast. New England certainly churned out a whole lot of samplers, all of the New England states. Mid-Atlantic, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and I'm going to lump Maryland and Delaware in with that group too. Delaware is this little teeny tiny state on the map, and we found 400 samplers there, so that's quite a bit for that. I'm not as familiar with samplers from the southern states. I have a couple of friends who collect samplers from North Carolina, so I suspect that there's something going on there where there were quite a few samplers made. You don't see too many older samplers that are west of the Ohio. Ohio has a fair number of samplers. Once you start getting west of Ohio, you get fewer and fewer. And I've never seen an old sampler made from California. That doesn't mean there isn't a few out there, but I've never seen anything from like truly the West Coast or say the Rocky Mountain areas. I've never seen a really old sampler from those areas. That's a good question. I've never been asked that one before, but that is a good question. But it was, and I think it was just the timing. You know, the East Coast was settled earlier than the rest of the United States, and the families came from all over. You know, perhaps a lot of these families that came from England or Scotland, France, Germany, all of those countries had a pretty strong needlework thing going on at the time that settlers were coming to America. And the mothers and older daughters probably they brought that skill with them, and they would just continue to be working with to be doing the work themselves, and to be working with their children, mothers working with their children to teach them how to do embroidery work.
Well,
Or send them to a school.
Thank you very much, Cindy. And everyone, please take some time, check out the samplers that Cindy brought and the historical size, some of the historical size collection. And can we have a closing round of applause, please?